Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's session, Mobilizing the Next Generation of Public Interest Lawyers, Equal Justice Works, Postgraduate Fellowships 101. My name is Janie Payne, and I'm the Vice President of Administration at Equal Justice Works. We're so grateful you are all able to join us today and hear from our fantastic panel. If you'd like to enable closed captioning on your screen, please click the closed captioning option at the bottom of your screen. If you have any questions or comments for our panelists during the session, please type them into the Pathable chat box. Our panelists will answer questions towards the end of the session. The session will run from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. If you have to leave during part of the session, you can always rejoin by clicking on the name of the session under the event agenda section. This session will be recorded, so if you are unable to rejoin, you will be able to listen to it at another date. Without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to today's presenters, Laura Roach, Sherene Thomas, and Clarence Oko.
Thank you so much, Janie. Welcome to the Equal Justice Works Fellowships 101 presentation. My colleagues and I are here to give you an overview of our fellowship programs and some insider information about how to apply. We are so excited to be here today to speak with you and to answer all of your most pressing fellowship questions. We have a little presentation for you at the top, which should take about 30 minutes. Then we have a special guest appearance from Clarence Oko, who is a current fellow in the field, and then we can jump into the audience Q&A. So first off, introductions. My name is Laura Roach, and I am a program manager here at Equal Justice Works, and I work on our fellowship cohort programs, which I will explain in more detail in a minute. I've been here for about 2 years, working primarily on our federally funded programs serving crime victims. Prior to working at Equal Justice Works, I managed an AmeriCorps program in Rhode Island, which helped vulnerable renters avoid eviction. I will go ahead and pass the baton to my superhero of a colleague, Sherene, who is here on this early Saturday morning, despite just getting over a cold. So thank you so much, Sherene.
Thanks, Laura. Good morning, everyone. My name is Sherene Thomas. I am a portfolio manager on the Design Your Own Fellowships team, managing the Midwest region, as well as the Washington, DC metro area. I'm excited to chat with you all about our fellowship program, and also really thrilled that Clarence can join us to talk about his personal experience with the fellowship. I'll pass it back over to you, Laura.
All right, well, in case you are unfamiliar, I want to start this presentation with an overview of Equal Justice Works' mission. Founded by law students in 1986, Equal Justice Works brings together an extensive network of students, lawyers, legal services organizations, and supporters to promote a lifelong commitment to public service and help fulfill our nation's promise of equal justice for all. Since the beginning of the organization, we have awarded over 2,000 fellowships to lawyers committed to public service. 85% of our fellows remain in public interest roles after their fellowships end. We have an extensive alumni network of lawyers dedicated to pursuing equal justice for underserved communities across the country. So let's dive into the exciting part of this presentation. How can you become a fellow? So there are 2 fellowship tracks at Equal Justice Works. The first is you can join a fellowship program, which we sometimes call the cohort model. In this track, you join a team of fellows deployed to a region or nationally focused on addressing a specific legal issue area. It is also distinct in how you apply. You apply directly to your host organization like another staff attorney position, but you get all the benefits of being an Equal Justice Works fellow, and you get to leverage a team of lawyers working on the same issue. The second track is Design Your Own, or DYO. This model is project-based. You work collaboratively with your prospective host organization to design a project on an area you're interested in, and you apply as a rising 3L. You apply directly to Equal Justice Works. Interviews are conducted by Equal Justice Works staff and selected sponsors. But Sherene will give you all the dirty details about that process because I'm here to talk about my favorite Equal Justice Works programs. How and why should you join a fellowship program? And I'll just rewind for a second to better define what a fellowship program is. So basically, Equal Justice Works, back to the other slide, Lauren. Thank you. So basically, Equal Justice Works has identified 3 priority areas: disaster resilience, crime victims, and housing. The staff at Equal Justice Works collaborate to design and fund programs ranging from only a few fellows to over 50 in a cohort or team. These programs are funded by various foundations and federal agencies. Once we've secured funding for a program, we launch an RFP to competitively select host organizations, which are generally legal aid organizations. Once we award fellowship slots to selected host organizations, they recruit and hire fellows with Equal Justice Works support. Anyone interested in applying to one of these fellowship programs would need to be a licensed attorney and apply directly to the host organization. Most fellowship programs sponsor fellows for 24 months. As a fellow in a cohort program, you are part of a community of practice. You receive tailored and responsive training in relevant legal issues from experts contracted by Equal Justice Works. For example, I work on our Elder Justice Program, and we partner with Justice and Aging, the preeminent experts on elder law, to provide training and technical assistance to our fellows. You have access to libraries of resources through partners such as the National Crime Victims Law Institute. And you can tap into your peers through regular virtual meetings, in-person conferences, email listservs, and more for advice on how to handle things like opposing counsel, complex litigation, and vicarious trauma. So, like I said before, Equal Justice Works identified 3 priority areas: disaster resilience, crime victims, and housing. Accordingly, we have 3 programs listed here. Our cohort programs are not currently accepting applications, but we will be in the coming months. However, you can sign up to receive our fellowships newsletter on the Equal Justice Works website to receive the latest information, including updates on any upcoming programs. I do want to take a minute to speak a little more in depth about each of our focus areas. Disaster resilience. The numbers on this slide are from a former disaster program, Disaster Recovery Legal Corps, which you can see was very successful. The Disaster Resilience Program, our current disaster program, mobilized 6 fellows and 6 law students to provide free civil legal aid in disaster-prone areas to ensure vital legal services are accessible to rebuild lives, stabilize communities, and create resilience. To date, these fellows have gained over $350,000 worth of economic benefits on behalf of their clients. Most of these benefits come from resolved title disputes or fines, fees, and debts waived or reduced. One of the fellows in Texas represented an individual in a Medicaid estate recovery program claim or MERP claim. The individual was attempting to clear the title to her home through probate of the previous owner's will. MERP had a claim against the decedent's estate, and through the fellow's work, the debt was waived, and the probate of the estate can proceed. So that's just one example of the kind of client work our disaster fellows work on. Crime victims often have complex civil legal issues and exceptional barriers to accessing help, such as post-traumatic stress disorder, fear of social stigma and retaliation, lack of economic resources, immigration status, and insufficient information. To support crime victims in overcoming these barriers, Equal Justice Works partners with legal aid organizations across the country to train and deploy attorney fellows to provide trauma-informed legal services, enforce crime victims' rights, and conduct outreach and training on victims' rights. Since 2016, Equal Justice Works has launched 3 programs advocating for crime victims: Elder Justice AmeriCorps program, the Crime Victims Justice Corps, which focused on providing civil legal aid to survivors of human trafficking and other crimes, and the current Elder Justice program. As an example of the kind of work these fellows do, one fellow in California, Lizette, pictured here, had a client who had been working without pay for weeks and was physically abused by his employer, including being threatened with a gun. He was a migrant worker and was afraid of reporting the abuse for fear of retaliation. He also didn't understand his rights under US law. He didn't know he was a victim of labor trafficking. The fellow informed him of his rights and helped him report the crime to law enforcement. Now he is safe from his employer. We also have a fellowship program focused on housing. This program is exciting because the fellows are lawyers and community organizers who work together to prevent evictions and advocate for tenants' protections locally and statewide. The Housing Justice Program fellows have not only been successful in preventing evictions in housing court, they have also been instrumental in organizing public pressure campaigns that have successfully resulted in a statewide eviction moratorium in Virginia and tenants' protections, such as extending the period of time tenants have to pay or quit from 5 days to 14 days, which can make all the difference when it comes to keeping a family in their home. When you are a member of one of our fellowship programs, you not only receive the benefits of being in a community of practice, you also get a salary and benefits commensurate with the salaries of other staff attorneys at your host organization. You get to attend the annual leadership development training hosted by Equal Justice Works, and you get funds for additional trainings from outside organizations. So you should definitely join a fellowship program. At this time, we know that we will be recruiting for new fellows in our Housing Justice Program and our Disaster Resilience Program in 2022. You can always get in touch with us when you are ready to apply to find out what positions are available. I will drop appropriate contact information in the chat on Pathable now. And with that, I will hand it over to you, Sherene.
Thanks, Laura. All right, so as Laura noted, for the Design Your Own Fellowship, individual candidates work with a nonprofit legal organization to design a 2-year fellowship project. And these projects are sponsored by law firms, corporations, bar associations, and individual donors. And to give you an idea of the size of our fellowship classes, we currently have 161 Design Your Own Fellows in the field. There are 85 fellows in the class of 2020, and that was the largest fellowship class that we've had to date. And for the class of 2021, which began their fellowships this September, there are 76 fellows in the field. And for 2022, we anticipate that the class will be around 78 fellows. It's a very competitive project. For 2022, received over 380 applications. So for each fellowship, we have identified 4 components. Those components are the candidate, the project, the host organization, and the sponsor. And I'll go into more detail on each of those components in the next few slides. For the first component, which is the candidate, in order for a candidate to be eligible for a fellowship, they must graduate from a member law school with a JD or an LLM. Additionally, the candidate cannot have held a full-time permanent public interest attorney position or have participated in another major fellowship program. However, a 1 to 2 year bridge funding or previous law school-based fellowship is okay. And in terms of keys to success, over the years, we've seen that the most successful candidates are folks who are able to demonstrate a personal connection to the work and also a commitment to public interest law. For the second component of the fellowship, which is the project, in order for the project to be eligible, it must benefit underserved people or focus on an unmet issue in our legal system. And the project can focus on direct legal services, advocacy, education, litigation, or some combination thereof, but it must be a legal project. Additionally, the project must be innovative. That means that it should not focus on something that your host organization is already doing, but rather should be an expansion of the work or providing services or providing the same type of services to a new client base or the same clients, but in a new or different way. And oops, sorry, I think I missed the last part on there. Lastly, for the project, the project can focus on any area or any issue of law except standard criminal defense work. So you can't be a public defender. And additionally, you cannot, or we don't fund international work. And in terms of keys to success, the project should not look like a staff attorney position. Rather, it should be an ambitious but feasible new project and something that's sustainable once your fellowship is over. The third component of the fellowship is the host organization. As I've mentioned, each fellow is required to work with a host organization, and that host org must be a nonprofit organization with legal staff. They must be capable of providing benefits, health insurance, and an office space if applicable. And they also have to have the capacity to supervise and support a new attorney on an exciting and ambitious fellowship project. And lastly, the organization must be based in the United States or its territories. And in terms of keys to success, it's important for the host organization to be a good fit for the candidate and the project. So your supervisor should have experience in the project area, and the project should align with the organization's mission and value, mission and vision. And while not required, we do recommend that, that candidates volunteer or intern with their host organization prior to applying, so that you know that host organization is a good fit for you and your project and the work that you'll be doing over that 2-year fellowship period. So on this slide, it gives a good breakdown or idea of the locations where fellows are currently working. So for the 2021 class, you'll see here that 67% of the fellows are working at organizations in major cities. And those top cities include New York, Washington, DC, Chicago, Boston, Oakland, and Los Angeles. 9% of those fellows, or 9% of the fellows are working at host organizations in rural communities, and 24% of the class is working in other cities throughout the country. The last component of the fellowship is the sponsors who generously fund our fellowship programs. As I've noted earlier, our sponsors include the law firms, corporations, foundations, and individual donors. And many of these sponsors are very engaged in the fellow selection process. They participate in the interviews and work very closely with fellows throughout the duration of the 2-year fellowship on pro bono matters. So it's also important to note that many of our sponsors share with us their preferred issue and geographic areas, and we regularly update our website with that information. So if you're interested, you can check the Equal Justice Works website for that list. So what are the benefits of the Design Your Own Fellowship Program? Beginning with the class of 2022, we will, Equal Justice Works will be contributing up to $57,000 for each fellow's salary. The salary amount is ultimately determined by their host organization, and similar to the public programs, the salary must be commensurate with the starting staff with the staff attorney salary for that host organization, that city, and the host organization is required to provide health insurance to their fellow. Additionally, we offer up to $5,000 in loan repayment for assistance for the 2-year fellowship. And we also host a leadership development training every year, which we just finished last week. It's a 3-day event. And then throughout the duration of the 2-year fellowship, we also host a monthly learning and networking events for our fellows, and have an extensive alumni network of over 2,200 fellows. So it's a great resource for you. In terms of writing the application, it's important to first note that the application is different from a standard job application or grant proposal. The application is very detailed, and once completed is approximately 10 to 12 pages, and is a business plan outlining the work that you're proposing to do with your host organization for the next 2 years. And to be successful, your application should demonstrate that what the legal need is, why you and your host organization are the best fit to meet this legal need. And additionally, in terms of keys to success, we've seen that competitive applicants do a good job at blending data, sharing personal stories, and also providing client narratives to highlight their project's anticipated impact. And so noted here are the key sections on the application. As I mentioned, it's a pretty long application, but some key areas to focus on are the statement of need, the goals, timeline, also sharing what your personal connection is to this work in the personal statement, and then ways that your sponsor or prospective sponsor can get involved in your work. So what to do now? Now that you have this information for 1Ls, you should be thinking about the type of fellowship project that you might be interested in, and begin identifying internships and building relationships with folks and organizations that do this type of work, or do the type of work that you are interested in doing in your fellowship. It's really important to invest this time from now, gaining that public interest experience and creating those relationships. And for 2Ls and 3Ls, and folks who may be clerking or taking a gap year, a gap fellowship, you should start approaching potential host organizations that you may be interested in working with, and start asking professors and supervisors for letters of recommendation, and begin fine-tuning your resume and outlining your personal statement for your application. And lastly, for more information, you can feel free to reach out to these email addresses for the Design Your Own Fellowships team. Any questions you may have about the application process, feel free to reach out to the fellowships@equaljusticeworks.org email. Any questions that you may have about the disaster resilience program and housing justice programs, you can reach out to those email addresses, and we'll include those in the Pathable chat as well. Oops, there was a slide out of order. For the, Lauren, can you go to the next one? Regarding the application cycle and the timeline, so we recently closed our applications for the 2022 fellowship class, and we'll begin conducting those interviews next month and on a rolling basis through March of next year. And once selected, those fellows will begin their fellowships next September. The next fellowship class that we will be accepting applications for is the class of 2023. And in June of 2022, we'll open up the applications for that class. And those applications, you can submit your applications from June through September of 2023. June through September of 2022. In October of 2022, our alumni reviewers who are substantive experts in these specific issue areas, they'll review those each application, and then we'll begin conducting interviews for the 2023 fellowship class in November of 2022, and conduct those interviews again on a rolling basis through March of 2023. And when selected, those fellows will then begin their fellowships this September of 2023. Meet our fellows. If you're curious about the types of projects our current or former fellows have worked on, or even the types of projects that a specific sponsor has funded, our website is a great resource for you. I'd really encourage you to check it out. Under the Meet Our Fellows section, you'll be able to look at each fellow's profile and do a search based off of their name, their class year, host organization, the issue area that they focused on, as well as their sponsor and law school. And lastly, and very importantly, thank you to our sponsor of the conference and career fair, Idealist. We appreciate your sponsorship and would not be able to do this incredible work and conference without you. And on that note, I will turn it over to our incredible fellow, Clarence Oko, who has agreed to join us today and talk about his fellowship project and experience through the selection process and ultimately the first year of his fellowship.
Hey, good morning, everybody, and thanks, Sherene, for that. So as Sherene mentioned, my name is Clarence Oko. I'm a 2020 Equal Justice Works Fellow working at the NAACP Legal Defense and Educational Fund, and I'm sponsored by the Text to Give campaign. And my project really focuses on the emergence of new technologies such as artificial intelligence, machine learning technologies, and other algorithmic decision-making systems, and the impact that they have on Black and Brown communities. So how do you use civil rights law, anti-discrimination law to ensure that the rights of communities of color are protected against these technologies? So to really start, like Sherene said, I want to spend a little time just talking about the selection process, the application process, and then ultimately, what it's looked like as I started my first year or finished up my first year as a fellow. So beginning in, that was 2020, 2019. I was at my 2L summer, I worked with the NAACP Legal Defense Fund as an intern. And pretty early on in the process, they had announced that they were interested in hosting a fellow again. And so what they requested was that we submitted our materials to them so that we could go through our internal selection process. So that took a little bit of time, but was very fortunate to be selected by the NAACP LDF to be the sponsored fellow. So once I was selected by LDF, essentially what happened is we worked with a team of attorneys, policy analysts, and some of their organizers to put together an application focused on the issues that I'm working on. Really try to make sure that we were incorporating the specific needs of the organization, but also identifying, like Sherene mentioned earlier, some of the areas in which LDF hadn't been able to previously work on these issues and how this project could essentially help fill some of those advocacy gaps. So the project that I'm working on kind of blends together several modes of advocacy. So there's a litigation component to it, there's a policy advocacy component, and then there's also a community education and mobilization component as well. So we put together the application, we applied back in September of whatever year that was, 2019, 2020, and went through that process. We waited a few months, was able to get back and had my interview with the Text to Give folks. I want to say that was March of 2020. And so that interview was, it was fun actually. So we had a number of equal justice. My project is a little different. I don't have a firm sponsor or a individual sponsor. It's a collection of sponsors, individuals who provide donations at our annual Scales of Justice event. So I had a chance to speak with a lot of the Equal Justice Work staff. So I had an early familiarity with the team, talking a little bit about my background, my interest in this project, the kind of hopes and goals that I had bringing to the project, and ultimately what kind of impact that we could create. And so went through that application, went through the interview, and was fortunate to be selected to be the Text to Give Fellow. So obviously the pandemic happened in the middle of all of this. I think literally I got confirmation that I was selected the week that everything in New York had shut down. So obviously, as you can imagine, we had to kind of pivot some aspects of the project kind of in real time. So I wouldn't be in the office. I wouldn't, have the same opportunities to travel extensively like others had been able to do in the past. But we were still going to try and figure out ways of making sure that we can maximize the impact that we would have given those new constraints. And it ironically ended up being an opportunity for me to be a little closer to community. So I think I may have mentioned this at the beginning, but I'm originally from Birmingham, Alabama. My mom's side of the family, they're all down in Alabama, all from the Deep South. And I had a chance after I passed the bar to kind of head back home and work remotely from home. And so that was actually really nice because, otherwise I would have been based in our New York office, but I actually had time to be in the South working on these issues in the communities that I come from and that I care about. So yeah, in the first year, like I mentioned, I was working remotely and had a chance to kind of dive into and develop my portfolio. So I have a range of cases, mostly principally focused in the economic justice context and in the policing and criminal legal system context. So to give you a flavor of some of the work that I do, LDF is a part of a coalition out of Florida called the Pasco Coalition. It's based off of a very troubling incident or an ongoing incident that's happening in a local community down there where a sheriff's office is working in collaboration with a school district to obtain confidential student data in order to support a local predictive policing program. So essentially they take a student's grades, their discipline records, histories of childhood trauma, and they feed that into their algorithm to predict which students are going to be what they say destined for a life of crime, destined to develop into prolific criminal offenders. Obviously, as many people may know, predictive policing systems are notorious, as well as many other algorithmic decision-making systems for reproducing and amplifying discriminatory policing practices, burdening already over-policed communities, saturating them with additional policing presence. And in the case of Pasco County, this can mean anything from having officers come and visit your home, having what they call prolific offender checks, where they follow, surveil, and monitor children as they move throughout the community. It can also mean having what they call Baker Acts, which are forms of involuntary psychiatric detention. So students can be held by law enforcement in these mental health facilities for up to 72 hours without their parents even knowing. And the range of harms are even greater than that, but are somewhat unknown because this program was operated in secrecy for potentially up to 20 years. So LDF is a part of the coalition. It's a group of local, state, and national organizations, as well as impacted families and communities, teachers, other advocates who are local, who are trying to figure out how to bring an end to this program. Since joining the coalition and since joining LDF for myself, had a chance to help with open records requests, submitting various forms of correspondence to local elected officials, as well as doing advocacy at the federal level. We were able to successfully get some changes to the program, but it's not enough. We want to see this program ultimately ended. We were able to do some advocacy at the federal level to get the Department of Justice and the Department of Education to open investigations into what's happening in the Pasco County. And there's continuing focus from a range of sectors to try and figure out how this program can be brought to an end. So, so that's just a sense of what the kind of work I do, what the process and timeline selection for a fellowship looks like, and then kind of what a day in the life of a fellow looks like. So I can stop there to see, I'll turn it back over to Sherene and happy to answer any questions that folks may have.
Thanks, Clarence. Yeah, we'll open it for questions. I know Laura is monitoring the chat box. Laura, you received any?
I haven't seen any questions in the chat box yet, but please feel free to drop any questions you have either for Clarence, Sherene, or myself into the chat box, and we would be happy to answer any questions you have. And thank you, Clarence, so much for sharing about your personal experience. And I'm sure that you would also be willing to answer some questions about your specific fellowship too. We do have a question in the chat box. Do you publish information about sponsor preferences? And I think that's a question for you, Sherene.
Yes, we do. So as I mentioned earlier, on the Equal Justice Works website, we regularly update once we hear back from a sponsor regarding their geographic and issue area preference, we update the website with that information.
All right, thank you. And we have another question. Are there other issue areas the cohort programs work on? And obviously, this is a question for the fellowships program side of the house. We, as I mentioned, focus on 3 priority areas. That is disaster resilience, housing, and crime victims. At the moment, we don't have any cohort programs focusing on issues outside of those 3 priority areas, though we are currently looking for other opportunities to fund other national and large cohort programs. So I would definitely encourage anyone who is interested in the next couple of years and possibly joining one of our cohort fellowship programs to please monitor our website and feel free to shoot me an email or contact any of the other email addresses that I dropped in the chat related to housing and disaster. We would be happy to provide you with more information as these programs are developed. And other possible priority areas that we may be looking to develop in the future are programs related to working with immigration, the opioid epidemic, and economic justice and expungement. So those are just possibilities of other priority areas our fellowship programs could focus on in the future. So we do have another question in the chat box. Can you give some examples of pro bono opportunities for sponsors? And Sherene, I think you can take this one.
Sure. So a lot of our sponsors offer to provide assistance with a direct representation. So they take on cases for assist the fellows with cases. They also assist with some advocacy work. So if they have a government relations side, they can assist with that. They also engage the fellows in non-legal work at times. So members of their teams might assist with marketing and creating Know Your Rights handouts and pamphlets. So really, there's a variety of different options that the sponsors have and ways that they can get involved.
All right, we have another question in the chat, and this one's for you, Clarence. What has been the most rewarding part of your fellowship so far? Do any specific moments stand out?
Yeah, that's a really great question. It's really tough. I think, to the extent that we are able to work directly with our clients and the communities that we serve, that has been the highlight. It's actually, I'm laughing now thinking about one in particular. Going back to the Pasco example, one of the things we had to do very early on when we were trying to figure out what was happening down there was build relationships with some of the local kind of community leaders. And one in particular was the head of the local NAACP chapter. And I was working with an attorney at the very beginning who had to eventually be pulled off. And so I was the kind of, remaining attorney who had been on the project from, its inception. And so me and the local NAACP chapter president, like slowly began to develop this really interesting relationship where, it'll be out of the blue one day and he'll call and he'll text and he'll just try to get an update on the case. And he's just such a fun character. And it's really amazing because, in your first year, you don't really expect to like have that many kind of meaningful interactions. You're thinking, oh, I'm gonna just be doing a doc review kind of situation. But, in fact, it was the exact opposite. It was seeing over the course of this year, the kind of trust that he's placed both in myself, but more importantly in the organization, in terms of being able to figure out how to deal with the problems that they're facing in the community. That has been really exciting. So the highlights, I guess, so far, whenever I get a chance to speak with him and hear what's going on and just see, genuinely both with him and with many of our other coalition partners, just the kind of trust and relationships that we've been able to develop, despite the fact that we've mostly been virtual throughout this entire process.
Great, thank you. And we do have another question for you, Clarence. Do you, at this time, have any plans for after your fellowship?
Yeah, so I'm hoping to be able to stay on with LDF. The select that process also takes a little bit of time, but I feel really good about being able to stay on. And then hopefully, try out one of the new offices that we have. We also have offices in DC and Atlanta. And I have a lot of family down in Georgia, so we'd love to be able to see how things are down there.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Yeah, thank you. I look forward to not living in real life Minority Report. So thank you for all the work that you're doing. We have another question in the chat. Do you have to be a 3L to apply for a DYO fellowship? What about after a clerkship? And you also mentioned that you applied directly to the host org. Oh, that's a cohort question. So I'll pass it over to you, Sherene, for the DYO question.
You do not have to be a 3L to apply for the DYO fellowship. You can be finishing up a clerkship. You can be early in your career, but have not have not had a fellowship with another major fellowship program, or have participated or have worked for another nonprofit legal organization before this.
And our second part of that question is, for cohort programs, you apply directly to the host organization, and that is true. So the question is, do you have to be a recent graduate, or can you be an experienced lawyer? And so for our program cohort fellowships, certainly we think it's a great experience for a new attorney, someone who has recently graduated from law school, has only recently become a licensed attorney. You have so much support from our training and technical assistance providers, plus you have this vast network of fellows all working on the same legal practice area. And often they have varying levels of experience and can really provide in-depth advice on specific cases. So for the Elder Justice Program, we do have some new attorneys, but it's not a requirement. You can have much more experience. In the Elder Justice Program, we have several fellows who have been prosecutors previously, and they really leverage that experience to be really fantastic advocates for their clients who are victims of elder abuse. They're also not afraid to litigate because they have that experience. So they are sort of exceptional in their roles, and they're able to provide really fantastic advice for our newer attorneys. And we have regular meetings where newer attorneys can come and ask specific questions to their peers and get advice when it comes to really complex cases like related to guardianship and financial exploitation. And that's just an example of one cohort program specifically related to elder abuse. But as I mentioned, we also have housing programs and the disaster resilience program, which all have their own complex legal issues that our cohort can really help to come up with practical solutions, remedies, advice for different issues that you may face as an attorney, whether you're newer or you do have more experience. All right, I think maybe give one more minute to see if we have any additional questions. And then if not, we can wrap it up. All right, seeing none in the chat, I want to thank everyone so much for being part of this session, and special thanks to Clarence, for coming in on a Saturday morning to talk about your fellowship experience. We really, really appreciate it. Thank you so much. And I am going to pass it over to my colleague, Janie.
Thank you, Laura. And I just want to echo what a wonderful wealth of information that you have provided to us. And thank you so much. And I would like everyone to join me in thanking the panelists for participating in today's session. We hope you enjoyed it. The recording of this session will be available for all of you to listen to starting tomorrow. You will have access to this Pathable site for 1 year, allowing you to come back and watch any of the conference sessions you were not able to watch live. We also want to thank our conference sponsor, Idealist, for helping make this year's conference and career fair possible. If you haven't already, we encourage you to listen to our Community of Impact, a conversation with Ami Dar and David Stern, where Ami Dar, founder and executive director of Idealist, shares with us his insights on both starting and maintaining a public interest career. If you have any questions about this year's fair or how Equal Justice Works can help you launch your public interest career, come speak with one of our representatives from 12 to 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time today. You can find us by searching for Equal Justice Works under the Organizations tab. We hope you enjoy the rest of the conference, and we wish you to have a wonderful and great day.